Okay. Everybody got to go to the bathroom? Okay. Hey, T-Bone. Here we go. All right, we're going to continue on page 552. I'm going to keep slugging through this. I just found out that this last bit was an hour and 20 minutes and like halfway, so it might be that same thing again. We're still got a ways to go. So you ready?
Yep.
Page 552, first column. The question at the bottom page of column 1 says, during the former day of the law, the capacities of the people may have been somewhat inferior to those of the people who lived when the Buddha was in the world, and yet they were surely much superior to those of the people in the middle day of the in the middle days of we start over again. All right. During the former day of the law, the capacities of the people may have been somewhat inferior to those who lived when the Buddha was in the world, and yet they were surely much superior to those of the people in the middle and the latter days of the law. How then can you say that in the early years of the former day of the law, the Lotus Sutra was ignored? It was during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law that such men as Ashvagosha, Nagarjuna, Aradeva, and Asanga appeared, and Bodhisattva Vasubandhu, who is known as the scholar of 1,000 works, wrote the treatise on the Lotus Sutra, in which he declared that the Lotus Sutra is first among all the sutras. The Tripitaka master Parmatha, in describing the transmission of the Lotus Sutra, says that in India there were more than 50 scholars who spread the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, and that Vasubandhu was one of them. Such was the situation in the former day of the law. Turning to the middle day of the law that followed, we find that the great teacher Tentai appeared in China around the middle of the period and completed the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra, the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra, and great concentration and insight in 30 volumes, in which he explored all the depths of meaning in the Lotus Sutra. At the time of the middle day of the law, the great teacher Dengyo appeared in Japan. He not only transmitted to our country the two doctrines of perfect wisdom and perfect meditation expounded by the great teacher Tentai, but also established a great ordination platform of perfect and immediate enlightenment on Mount Hei. Thus, the perfect precepts were acknowledged throughout Japan, and everyone from the ruler on down to the common people looked up to Enrakuji Temple on Mount Hei as their guide and teacher. How then can you say in the middle day of the law the teachings of the Lotus Sutra were not widely disseminated and spread abroad? Answer. It is a commonly accepted assertion among the scholars of our times that the Thus Come One invariably preached his teachings in accordance with the capacities of his listeners. But in fact, this is not how the Buddha actually truly taught. If it were true that the greatest doctrines were always preached for the persons with the most superior capacities and understanding, then why, when the Buddha first achieved enlightenment, did he not preach the Lotus Sutra? Why, during the first 500 years of the former day of the law, were the teachings of the Mahayana Sutras not spread abroad, and if instead of the Agamas? And if it were true that the finest doctrines are revealed to those who have a particular connection with the Buddha, then why did Shakyamuni Buddha preach the meditation on the Buddha Sutra for his father, King Suddhodana, and the Maya Sutra for his mother, Lady Maya, rather than the Lotus Sutra? And if the reverse were true, namely, that secret doctrines should never be revealed to evil people having no connection with the Buddha or to slanderers of Buddhism, then why did the monk Realization of Virtue teach the Lotus Sutra to all the countless monks who were guilty of breaking the precepts? And why did Bodhisattva never disparaging address the four kinds of believers who were slanderers of the law and propagate to them the teachings of the Lotus Sutra? Thus, we can see that it is a great mistake to assert that the teachings are invariably expounded according to the listener's capacities. Question. Do you mean to say that Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, and the others did not teach the true meaning of the Lotus Sutra? Answer. That is correct. They did not teach it. Question. Then what doctrines did they teach? Answer. They taught the doctrines of provisional Mahayana, the various exoteric and esoteric teachings such as the flower garland, correct and equal, wisdom, and Mahavrachana Sutras, but they did not teach the doctrines of the Lotus Sutra. Question, how do you know that this is so? Answer, The treatises written by Bodhisattva Nagarjuna run some 300,000 verses. Not all of them have been transmitted to China and Japan, so it is difficult to make statements about their true nature. However, examining the ones that have been transmitted to China, such as Commentary on the 10 Stages, the Treatise on the Middle Way, and the Treatise on the Great Perfection of Wisdom, we may surmise that the treatises remaining in India are of similar nature. Question: among the treatises remaining in India, are there any that are superior to the ones transmitted to China? Answer: there is no need for me to make pronouncements of my own on the subject of Bodhisattva Nagarjuna. For the Buddha himself predicted that after he had passed away, a man called Bodhisattva Nagarjuna would appear in southern China, and that his most important teachings would be found in a work called the Treatise on the Middle Way. Such was the Buddha's prediction. Accordingly, we find that there were 70 scholars in India who followed in the wake of Nagarjuna, all of them major scholars, and all of these 70 scholars took Treatise on the Middle Way as the basis of their teachings. Treatise on the Middle Way is a work in 4 volumes and 74 chapters, and the core of its teaching is expressed in the four-phrase verse that describes the nature of phenomena arising from dependent origination. This 4-phrase verse sums up the 4 teachings and the 3 truths contained in the Flower Garland's Wisdom and other sutras. It does not express the 3 truths as revealed and unified in the Lotus Sutra. Question: is there anyone else who thinks the way you do about this matter? Answer: Tentai says, do not presume to compare Treatise on the Middle Way to the teachings of the Lotus Sutra and elsewhere. So don't compare Nagarjuna to Shakyamuni, all right? And elsewhere he says, Vasubandhu and Nagarjuna clearly perceived the truth in their hearts, but they did not teach it. Instead, they employed the provisional Mahayana sutras in which were suited to the times. Myolo states, for demolishing false opinions and establishing the truth, nothing can compare to the Lotus Sutra. And Sung Yi states, Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu clearly compare with Tiantai. Question: in the latter day of the Tang dynasty, the Tripitaka master Pukun introduced to China a treatise in 1 volume entitled The Treatise on the Mind Aspiration The Treatise on the Mind Aspiring for Enlightenment, which authorship is described as Bodhisattva Nagarjuna. The great teacher Koba says of it, this treatise represents the heart and core of all the 3,000 treatises of Nagarjuna. What is your opinion on this? Okay, this is going to be the introduction of a conflicting text that he's going to dispute, refute, and expose now. The treatise. Answer. This treatise consists of 7 leaves. There are numerous places in it that could not be the words of Nagarjuna. Okay, so the Daishonin immediately said, I'm going to refute this. It's supposed to be from Nagarjuna. I don't think it's from Nagarjuna. It's not from Nagarjuna. Therefore, in the catalog of Buddhist texts, it is sometimes listed as a work of Nagarjuna and sometimes as a work of Pukun. The matter of its authorship has never been resolved. In addition, it is not a summation of the lifetime teachings of the Buddha, and it contains many loose statements. To begin with, a vital passage, the one asserting that only in the true word teachings can one attain Buddhahood in one's present form, is an error, since it denies the fact that the Lotus Sutra enables one to attain Buddhahood in one's present form, a fact well attested to by both scriptural passages and actual events. Instead, it asserts that the true word sutras enable one to attain Buddhahood in one's present form, an assertion for which there is not the slightest proof in scriptural passages or actual events. The one word only in the assertion that only in the true word teachings can one attain Buddhahood in one's present form is the greatest error of all and a great slander. In view of the facts, it would seem likely that the work was written by Pukun. himself, who, in order to ensure that the people of the time would regard it with sufficient gravity, attributed it to Nagarjuna. Pukum makes a number of other errors as well. Thus, in his translation, the rulers of the rituals based on the Lotus Sutra, which deals with the Lotus Sutra, he defines the Buddha of the lifespan chapter as the Buddha Amida, an obvious and glaring mistake. He also claims that the Dharani chapter of the Lotus Sutra should follow immediately after the supernatural powers chapter, and that the entrustment chapter should come at the very end. Views that are not even worth discussing. That is not all. He stole the Mahavajrana precepts from the Chentai school and obtaining support in the form of a command from Emperor Taizong, established them in the 5 temples of Mount Wu Tuai. He decreed that the classification of doctrinal tenets based on Chentai school should be adopted by the True Word school as well. On the whole, he did many things to confuse and mislead the world. It is acceptable to use translations of sacred texts by other persons, but translations of sutras or treatises from the hand of Pukum are not to be trusted. When both old and new translations are taken into consideration, we find that there are 186 persons who brought sutras and treatises from India and introduced them to China in translation. With the exception of one man, the Tripitaka master Kumarajiva, all of these translators have made errors of some kind. But among them, Pukum is remarkable for the large number of his errors. It is clear that he deliberately set out to confuse and mislead others and gain power and tribute by the kings, right? Question: how do you know that the translators other than Kumarajiva made mistakes? Do you mean not only to destroy the Zen, Nembutsu, True Word, and other of the 7 major schools, but to discredit all the works of the translators that have been introduced to China and Japan? Answer: This is a highly confidential matter, and I should discuss it in detail only when I am face to face with the inquirer. Because he's saying, basically, you could ask me a whole bunch of different questions here, and every single little person is going to have a question that requires a separate answer. This is going to be too big for me to put in here. He says, however, I will make a few comments here about the most distinctive elements of this discrepancy. This is a highly confidential matter, and I will discuss it in detail only when I am face to face with the inquirer. However, I will make a few comments here. Kumarajiva himself said, when I examine the various sutras in use in China, I find that all of them differ from the Sanskrit originals. How can I make people understand this? I have only one great wish. My body is unclean, for I have taken a wife, but my tongue alone is pure and could never speak false words concerning the teachings of Buddhism. After I die, make certain that I am cremated. If at that time my tongue is consumed by the flames, then you may discard all the sutras that I have translated. Such were the words that he spoke again and again from his lecture platform. As a result, everyone from the ruler on down to the common people hoped they would not die before Kumarajiva, so that they might see what happens when he's cremated. Eventually, Kumarajiva died and was cremated, and his impure body was completely reduced to ashes. Only his tongue remained, resting atop a blue lotus that had sprung up in the midst of the flames. It sent out shining rays of 5-colored light that made the night as bright as day, and in daytime outshone the rays of the sun. This then is why the sutras translated by all the other scholars came to be held in little esteem, while those translated by Kumarajiva, particularly his translation of the Lotus Sutra, spread rapidly throughout Japan. Pardon me. Question. Okay, this tells us about the translators who lived at the time of Kumarajiva or before. But what about later translators such as Shanwei or Pukum? Answer: these guys are true word guys, right? Even in the case of translators who lived after Kumarajiva, if their tongues burned up when they were cremated, it means that there are errors in their work. The Dharma Characteristic School in earlier times enjoyed a great popularity in Japan, but the great teacher Dingyo attacked it, pointing out that though the tongue of Kumarajiva was not consumed by the flames, those of Chuang Tsung and Su In burned along with their bodies. Emperor Kemu, impressed by his argument, transferred his allegiance to the Tendai Lotus school. In the 3rd and 9th volumes of the Nirvana Sutra, we find the Buddha predicting that when his teachings are transmitted from India to other countries, many errors will be introduced into them, and the chances for people to gain enlightenment through them will be reduced. Therefore, the great teacher Myola remarks, whether or not the teachings are grasped correctly depends upon the persons who transmit them. It is not determined by the sage's original pronouncements. He is saying that no matter how the people of today may follow the teachings of the sutras in hopes of a better life in the hereafter, if the sutras they follow are in error, then they can never attain enlightenment. But that is not to be attributed to any fault of the Buddha. In studying the teachings of Buddhism, apart from the distinctions between Hinayana and Mahayana, provisional and true, and exoteric and esoteric teachings, this question of the reliability of the sutra translation is the most important of all. Continuing on page 556. Question. You say that during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law, scholars knew in their hearts that the truth of the Lotus Sutra was surpassed. Question. You say that during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law, scholars knew in their hearts that the truth of the Lotus Sutra far surpassed the teachings of the other exoteric and esoteric sutras, but that they did not proclaim this fact to others, merely teaching the doctrines of the provisional Mahayana. This may be the case, though I find it difficult to agree. Although around the middle of the 1,000 years of the middle day of the law, the great teacher Tentai Chi appeared. In the 10 volumes or 1,000 leaves of his profound meaning, he discussed in detail the meaning of the 5 characters composing the title of the Lotus Sutra, Myoho Rengekyo. In the 10 volumes of his words and phrases, he discussed each word and phrase of the sutra. From the opening words, "This is what I heard," through the very last words, "They bowed in obeisance and departed." He interpreted them in the light of the 4 guidelines, namely causes and conditions, correlated teachings, and the theoretical and essential teachings, and the observation of the mind, once more devoting 1,000 leaves to the discussion. In the 20 volumes composing these 2 volumes, Profound Meaning and the Words and Phrases, he likened the teachings of all the other sutras to streams and rivers, and the Lotus Sutra to the great ocean. He demonstrated that the waters that make up the Buddhist teachings of all the worlds of the 10 directions flow throughout the loss of the single drop into the great ocean of the Lotus Sutra. He demonstrated that the waters that make up the Buddhist teachings of all the worlds of the 10 directions flow without the loss of a single drop into the great ocean of the Lotus Sutra. In addition, he examined all of the doctrines of the great scholars of India, not overlooking a single point, as well as the doctrines of the 10 teachers of northern and southern China, refuting those that deserve to be refuted In the 20 volumes composing the 2 works, Profound Meaning and Words and Phrases, this is the last paragraph, first column, page 556. My eyes are playing tricks on me, sorry about that. In the 20 volumes composing these 2 works, Profound Meaning and Words and Phrases, he likened the teachings of all the other sutras to streams and rivers, and the Lotus Sutra to the great ocean. He demonstrated that the waters that make up the Buddhist teachings of all the worlds of the 10 directions flow without the loss of a single drop into the great ocean of the Lotus Sutra. In addition, he examined all of the doctrines of the great scholars of India, not overlooking a single point, as well as the doctrines of the 10 teachers of northern and southern China, refuting those that deserved to be refuted and adopting those that were worthy of acceptance. In addition to the works of the just mentioned, he also expounded great concentration and insight in 2 volumes, in 10 volumes, in which he summed up the Buddha's lifetime's teachings on meditation in the concept of a single moment of life, and encompassed all the living beings and their environments of the 10 worlds in the concepts of the 3,000 realms. The pronouncements found in these works of Tentai surpass those of all the scholars who lived in India during the 1,000 years of the former day of the law, and are superior to the commentaries of the teachers who lived in China during the 500 years preceding Tentai. Therefore, the great teacher Chi Tsang of the 3 Treatises school wrote a letter urging 100 or more of the leaders and elders of the schools of northern and southern China to attend the great teacher Tentai's lectures on the sutra. What happens only once in 1,000 years, what takes place only once in 500 years, has happened today, he wrote. Nanye, with his superior sageness, Tiantai, with his clear wisdom, long ago they received and upheld the Lotus Sutra, and with body, mouth, and mind, and now they have appeared once again as these honored teachers. Not only have they caused the sweet dew of Amrita to fall in the land of China, but indeed they have made drums of the law thunder even as far away as India. They profess the wonderful, They profess the wonderful enlightenment that comes They profess the wonderful enlightenment that comes with inborn understanding, and their exposition of the sutra texts truly are unparalleled since the time of Wei and Chen dynasties. Therefore, I wish to go with 100 or more priests of the meditational practice and beg to receive lectures of the great teacher Chi Chi. The disciplined master Tao Xuan of Mount Chongnan praised the great teacher Tiantai by saying, his thorough understanding of the Lotus Sutra is like the noonday sun shining down into the darkest valley. His exposition of the Mahayana teachings is like a powerful wind roaring at will throughout the great sky. Though the teachers of words and phrases might gather. That was really important, thank you. Though the teachers of words and phrases might gather by the thousands and attempt to inquire, thank you, that made all the difference in the world. I'm having trouble seeing. Yeah, it's getting dark. Okay. Though the teachers of words and phrases might gather by the thousands and attempts to inquire into his wondrous arguments, they could never understand them all. His teachings are as clear as a finger pointing at the moon, and their essence returns to the ultimate truth. The great teacher Fa Tsang of the Flower Garland School praised Tiantai in these words: men like Nanye and Tiantai, Chi Chi, can understand the truth through intuition, and in practice have already ascended to the first stage of security. They recall the teachings of the law as they heard them on Eagle Peak, and present them that way today. There is an account of how the Tripitaka master Pukun of the True Word School and his disciple Han Kuang both abandoned the True Word School and became followers of the great teacher Tentai. The biography of eminent priest states, when I, Han Kuang, was traveling in India together with the Tripitaka master Pukun, a monk said to him, in the land of China there is the teachings of Tentai which are most suitable in helping distinguish correct from incorrect doctrines and illuminating what is partial and what is perfect. What it will be worth to translate these would it not be well to translate these writings and bring them here to this country? This is strangely written. This story was related by Han Kuang to the teacher Miao Lo. When he heard this story, Miao Lo exclaimed, "Does this not mean that Buddhism has been lost in India, the country of its origin, and now must be sought in the surrounding regions? Even though in China there are few people who recognize the greatness of Tiantai's teachings, they are like the people of Lu. Now, if there had been any major treatises in China that could compare to these 3 works in 30 volumes by Tiantai, then why would the Indian monk have asked that Tiantai's commentaries be brought from China? In view of all this, how can you deny that during the middle day of the law, the true meaning of the Lotus Sutra was made clear, and that the widespread proclamation and propagation of its teachings was accomplished throughout the southern continent of Jampadvipa?" Answer. The great teacher Tiantai preached and spread throughout China a perfect meditation and perfect wisdom, surpassing the lifetime teachings of the Buddha, and that had never been preached previously by any of the scholars in the 1400 or more years since the Buddha's passing. That is, in the 1,000 years of the former day of the law and in the first 500 years of the middle day. His fame even reached as far as India. This would seem to resemble the widespread proclaiming and propagating of the Lotus Sutra. But at this time, an ordination platform of the perfect and immediate enlightenment had not yet been established. So what he's basically saying now is like, wasn't Tiantai's interpretation all absolutely correct? He's going, it's a matter of time. And now he's going to talk about why Dingyo's interpretation surpasses even Tiantai's. Okay? Answer. The great teacher Tiantai preached and spread throughout China perfect meditation, perfect wisdom, surpassing the lifetime teaching of the Buddha that had never been preached previously by any of the scholars in the 1400 or more years since the Buddha's passing. That is, in the 1,000 years of the former day of the law and the first 400 years of the middle day. His fame even reached as far as India. This would seem to resemble the widespread proclaiming and propagating of the Lotus Sutra. But at this time, an ordination platform of the perfect and immediate enlightenment had not yet been established. Instead, Tiantai's disciples followed the Hinayana precepts, which were grafted into the perfect wisdom and perfect meditation. A rather ineffectual combination. It was like the sun in eclipse or the moon when it is less than full. Whatever you may say, the time of the great teacher Tiantai corresponds to the period described in the Great Collection Sutra as the age of reading, reciting, and listening. The time had not yet come for broadly proclaiming and propagating the Lotus Sutra. Question. The great teacher Dingyo was born in Japan in the time of Emperor Kamu. He refuted the mistaken beliefs that had been held sway in Japan for more than 200 years since the time of Emperor Kime, and declared his support for the perfect wisdom and perfect meditation taught by the great teacher Tiantai. In addition, he repudiated as invalid the original platforms that had been established at 3 places in Japan to confirm the Hinayana precepts brought over by the Reverend Ganji, and instead set up the Mahayana-specific ordination platform of the perfect and immediate enlightenment on Mount Heiyi. As he's already stated previously in this Gosho, in this treatise. This was the most momentous event that had ever taken place in India, China, Japan, or anywhere else, and Jampadvipa in the whole world during the 1800 years following the Buddha's passing. So he's immediately saying Dingyo surpasses everybody prior to Dingyo. I do not know whether the great teacher Dingyo's inner enlightenment was inferior or equal to that of Nagarjuna and Tiantai, but I am convinced that in calling upon all Buddhist believers to adhere to a single doctrine, he showed himself to be superior to Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu and to surpass even Nanye and Tiantai. In general, we may say that during the 1800 years following the passing of the Buddha, these 2 men, Tiantai and Dingyo, were the true votaries of the Lotus Sutra. Thus, Dingyo writes in his work, The Outstanding Principles of the Lotus Sutra. The sutra says, if you were to seize Mount Sumeru and fling it far off to the measureless Buddha lands, that too would not be difficult. But if after the Buddha has entered into extinction in the time of evil, you can preach this sutra, that would be difficult indeed. In commenting on this passage, I have this to say. Shakyamuni taught that the shallow is easy to embrace, but the profound is difficult. To discard the shallow and seek the profound is the way of a person of courage. The great teacher Tendai trusted and obeyed Shakyamuni and worked to uphold the Lotus Sutra, spreading its teachings throughout China. We of Mount Hei inherited the doctrine from Tendai and the work to uphold the Lotus School and to disseminate its teachings throughout Japan. The meaning of this passage, and that was from, this is from Dingyo stating this. The meaning of this passage is as follows. From the time of the Buddha's advent in the wise kalpa in the 9th period of decrease, when the human lifespan measured 100 years, throughout the 50 years of his preaching life, as well as during the 1800 or more years after his passing, there might actually have been a small person, only 5 feet in height, who could nevertheless lift a gold mountain 168,000 yojanas, or 6,620,000 ri in height, and hurl it over the iron encircling mountains faster than a sparrow flies, just as he might take a 1 or 2 inch stone and toss it a distance of 1 or 2 cho. But even if there have been such a person, it would be rarer still for someone to appear in the latter day of the law who could expound the Lotus Sutra as the Buddha did. Yet the great teacher Tendai and the great teacher Dingyo were just such persons, able to teach it in a manner similar to the Buddha. In India, the scholars never went as far as to propagate the Lotus Sutra. In China, the teachers before Tendai either passed over it or fell short of it. As for later men such as Suin, Fa Sang, or Shan Wei, they were the kind who say that east is west or declare that heaven is earth. And these are not opinions that the great teacher Dingyo put forward merely to enhance his own worth. In the 19th day of the first month of the 21st year of the Inraku era, Emperor Kamu paid a visit to the temple at Mount Takeo. He summoned more than 10 eminent priests from 6 schools and 7 major temples of Nara, including Zingi, Shoyu, Hoki, Chonin, Chinyoku, Ampuku, Gonso, Shuin, Jiko, Ginyo, Saiko, Dosho, Kosho, and Kambin, to come to the temple to debate with the Dharma teacher Saicho, to come and debate Dingyo. But they became tongue-tied after their first few words and could not speak a second or third time. Instead, all bowed their heads as one and pressed their palms together in a gesture of awe. The 3 treatises teachings concerning the 2 storehouses of teachings, the teachings of the 3 periods, and the thrice-turned wheel of the law, the Dharma characteristics doctrines concerning the teachings of the 3 periods and the 5 natures, and the flower garlands doctrines of the 4 teachings and the 5 teachings, the root teachings and the branch teachings, the 6 forms and the 10 mysteries. All their frameworks were utterly refuted. It was as though the beams and rafters of a great edifice had broken and collapsed. The proud banners of the 10 and more priests had also been toppled. At that time, the emperor, who was greatly amazed at the proceedings, because he didn't think Dingyo was going to kick everybody's ass, but he did. At that time, the emperor was greatly amazed at the proceedings, and on the 28th day of the same month, he dispatched Weiko no, Hiro no, and Otomo no Kunimichi as imperial envoys to question the men of the 7 temples and 6 schools at greater length. All of them in turn submitted a memorial acknowledging that they had been defeated in the debate and won over by Dingyo's arguments. When we privately examine profound meaning and other commentaries by Tendai, we find that they sum up all the teachings expounded by Shakyamuni Buddha in his lifetime. The full purport of the Buddha's doctrines is made clear without a single point being left unexplained. The Tentai school surpasses all other schools and is unique in pointing out the single way for all to follow. The doctrines that it expounds represent the most profound mystic truth and are something that we, students of the 7 major temples and 6 schools, have never met before and have never seen before. Is everything okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, at last, the dispute that has continued so long between the three treatises and Dharma characteristic schools has been resolved as dramatically as though ice had melted. The truth has been made abundantly clear as though clouds and mist had parted to reveal the light of the sun, moon, and stars. In the 200 or more years since Prince Shotoku spread the Buddhist teachings in this country, a great many sutras and treatises have been lectured upon, and their principles have been widely argued, but until now, many doubts have remained to be settled. Moreover, the lofty and perfect doctrines of the Lotus Sutra had not yet been revealed, Moreover, the lofty and perfect doctrines of the Lotus Sutra had not yet been properly explained and made known. Was it that the people who lived during this period were not yet qualified to taste its perfect flavor? In our humble view, the ruler of our sacred dynasty has reviewed the charge given long ago by the thus come one Shakyamuni and has undergone profound instruction in the pure and perfect teaching of the Lotus Sutra, so that the doctrines of the unique and wonderful truth that it expounds have for the first time been explained and made clear. Thus, we, the scholars of the 6 schools, have for the first time understood the ultimate truth. From now on, all the beings in this world who are endowed with life will be able to embark on the ship of the wonderful and perfect truth and quickly reach the opposite shore. Zingi and others of our group have met with great good fortune because of karmic bonds and have been privileged to hear these extraordinary words. Were it not for some profound karmic tie, how could we have been born in this sacred age? In China, in past times, Chia Xiang assembled some 100 other priests and together with them acknowledged the great teacher Tentai to be a true sage. After that, in Japan, top of page 560, more than 200 priests of the 7 temples of Nara proclaimed the great teacher Dingyo to be worthy of the title of sage. Thus, during the 2,000 and more years after the passing of the Buddha, these 2 sages appeared in the 2 countries of China and Japan, respectively. In addition, the great teacher Dingyo established on Mount Hiei ordination platform for conferring the great precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment, precepts that even the great teacher Tentai had never propagated. Until then, can you deny that in the latter part of the middle day of the law, the wide proclamation and propagation of the Lotus Sutra was achieved? Pardon me. How then can you deny that in the latter part of the middle day of the law, the wide proclamation and propagation of Lotus Sutra was achieved? That was all a question, saying, you're not talking about the latter day of the law. Dengyo and Tentai had already gotten after it in the middle. This is the answer to that position, because it's really now about Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Answer on page 560, first column, first full paragraph. Answer, as I have explained in my earlier discussion, a great truth that was not spread widely by Mahakashayapa or Ananda was in time, pardon me for a moment, first column 560. Answer, as I have explained in my earlier discussion, a great truth that was not spread widely by Mahakashayapa or Ananda was in time propagated by Ashvaghosha, Nagarjuna, Aradeva, and Vasubandhu. As I have also explained in my discussion, there was a great truth that was not fully made known by Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, and the others, but was propagated by the great teacher Tentai. And as I have further explained, it remained for the great teacher Dengyo to establish an it remained for the great teacher Dingyo to establish an ordination platform of the great precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment that were not spread widely by the great teacher Tentai Chiche. And, unbelievable as it may seem, there clearly appears in the text of the Lotus Sutra a correct law that is supremely profound and secret, one that, though expounded in full by the Buddha in the time since his passing, has never been propagated by Mahakashayapa, Ananda, Ashvagosha, Nagarjuna, Asanga, or Vasubandha, nor even by Tentai or Dingyo. The most difficult and perplexing question is whether or not this profound law, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, this profound law can be broadly proclaimed and propagated throughout the entire land of Jampadvipa, now at the end of the latter day of the law, the fifth 500-year period following the Buddha's passing. Question: what is this secret law? First, tell me its name, and then I want to hear its meaning. If what you say is true, then perhaps Shakyamuni Buddha will appear in the world once more, or Bodhisattva's superior practices will once again emerge from the earth. Speak quickly, for pity's sake. They say that the Tripitaka master Sun Tang, after dying and being reborn 6 times, was finally able to reach India, where he spent 19 years. But he claimed that the one vehicle doctrine of the Lotus Sutra was a mere expedient teaching, and that the Agama Sutras of Hinayana Buddhism represent the true doctrine. And the Tripitaka master Pukun, when he paid a tribute, when he returned to India, his homeland, announced that the Buddha of the lifespan chapter of Lotus Sutra was Amida. This is like saying that east is west, or calling the sun the moon. They drove their bodies in vain and exerted their minds to no avail. But fortunately, because we were born in the latter day of the law, without taking a single step, we can complete the bodhisattva practice that requires 3 asamyak kalpas, and without feeding our heads to a tigress, we can obtain the unforeseen crown of the Buddha's head. Answer: this law, on page 560, bottom of the second column, this law is revealed in the text of the Lotus Sutra. So it is an easy matter for me to explain it to you. But first, before clarifying this law, there are 3 important concerns that I must mention. It is said that no matter how vast the ocean, it would not hold within it the body of a dead person. And no matter how thick the crust of the earth, it would not support one who is undutiful to one's parents. According to the Buddhist teachings, however, even those who commit the 5 cardinal sins may be saved, and even those who are unfilial may gain salvation. It is only the ichkantik, or persons of incorrigible disbelief, those who slander the law, and those who pretend to be foremost in observing the precepts, who cannot be forgiven. The 3 sources of difficulty mentioned above are the Nimbutsu school, the Zen school, and the True Word school. The first, the Nimbutsu school, has spread throughout Japan, and the Nimbutsu is on the lips of the 4 categories of Buddhists. The second, the Zen school, has produced arrogant priests who talk of their 3 robes and 1 begging bowl, and who fill the area within the 4 seas, regarding themselves as the enlightened leaders of the whole world. The third, the True Word school, is in a class by itself. It receives support from Mount Hei, Tojo, and the 7 temples of Nara and Onjoji, as well as from the high priestly officials, including the chief priests of Mount Hei, and prolate the Onmuro, the chief official of Onjoji, and supervisors of the various temples and shrines. Since the sacred mirror kept in the lady officials' quarters of the imperial palace was destroyed by the fire, the precious mudra of the thus come one Mahavrochana has been regarded as a mirror of the Buddha to take its place. And since the precious sword was lost in the Western Sea, the 5 honored ones of the True Word school have been looked upon as capable of cutting down the enemies of the Japanese nation. So firmly entrenched are these beliefs that, though the stone that marks the duration of a kalpa might be worn completely away, it would seem that they would never be overthrown. And though the great earth itself might turn upside down, people would never question them. Further, the great teacher Tentai defeated in debate the leaders of the other schools in northern and southern China. The true words teachers had not yet been introduced to that country. And when the great teacher Dingyo won victory over the 6 schools of Japan, the true word doctrines escaped refutation. On several occasions, they have managed to evade their powerful enemies, their powerful opponents, and on the contrary, have succeeded in overshadowing and imperiling the great teaching of the Lotus Sutra. In addition, the great teacher Jikaku, who was a disciple of the great teacher Dingyo, went so far as to adopt the doctrines of the True Word School, obscure the Tendai doctrines of Mount Hei, and turn the entire school into a sphere of the True Word School. But who could effectively oppose such a person of authority, such as Jikaku? Thus, helped on by prejudiced views, the false doctrines of the great teacher Kobo continue to escape condemnation. It is true that the Reverend Annan did voice a concern, It is true that the Reverend Annan did voice a concern, It is true that the Reverend Annan did voice a certain opposition to Kobo, but all he did was to promote the Flower Garland Sutra from second place and substitute the Lotus Sutra for it, and still rank the Lotus Sutra as inferior to the Mahavajracana Sutra. He was nothing more than an arranger of worldly compromises. Question: in what way are these 3 schools in error? Okay, and we're talking about, again, Zen, True Word, and Nimbutsu. Let us first consider the Pure Land School, Nimbutsu. In China, in the time of the Qi dynasty, there was a priest named Tan Luan. He was originally a follower of the 3 Treatises school, but when he read the treatise by Nagarjuna entitled Commentary on the 10 Stages Sutra, he espoused the 2 categories of the difficult to practice way and the easy to practice way. Later, there was a man called the meditation master Tao Cho, who lived during the Tang dynasty. Originally, he had given lectures on the Nirvana Sutra, but when he read Tan Luan's account of his conversion to faith in the Pure Land teachings, Tao Cho abandoned the Nirvana Sutra and likewise changed over to the Pure Land faith, establishing the 2 categories of the Sacred Way teachings and the Pure Land teachings. In addition, Tao Cho had a disciple named Shan Tao, who postulated 2 types of religious practice that he called sundry practices and correct practices. In Japan, some 200 years after the beginning of the latter day of the law, in the time after the retired Emperor Gotoba, there lived a man named Honen. Addressing his words to all priests and lay believers, he stated, Buddhist teachings are based upon the capacities of the people of the period. The Lotus Sutra and the Mahavajracana Sutra, the doctrines of the 8 or 9 schools, including the Tendai and True Word School, the teachings of the Buddha's lifetime, the Mahavajracana Hinayana School, the teachings, including Tendai and True Word, the teachings of the Buddha's lifetime, the Mahavajracana and Hinayana, the exoteric and esoteric, provisional and true teachings, as well as the schools based on them, were all intended for people of superior capacities and superior wisdom who lived during the 2,000 years of the former and middle days of the law. Now that we have entered the latter day of the law, no matter how diligently one may practice such teachings, they will bring no benefit. Moreover, if one mixes such practices with the practice of the Nimbutsu addressed to the Buddha Amida, then the Nimbutsu will be rendered ineffective and will not lead the believer to rebirth in the Pure Land. Okay? This is not something that I have taken upon myself to declare. Bodhisattva Nagarjuna and the Dharma teacher Tan Luan both designate such practices as the difficult to practice way. Tao Cho says that not a single person ever attained enlightenment through them, and Shantao affirms that not even 1 person in 1,000 could be saved by them. Those persons whom I have quoted were all leaders of the Pure Land school, and so you may be inclined to question their words. But is the sage of the former times Eshin unsurpassed by any wise priest of the Tendai school or True Word school in the latter age? He stated in his work entitled The Essentials of Rebirth in the Pure Land that the doctrines of the exoteric and esoteric Buddhism are not the kind of teachings that can free us from the sufferings of birth and death. Moreover, the work entitled The 10 Conditions for Rebirth in the Pure Land by Yokan of the Three Treatises School states the same opinion. Therefore, if people will abandon the Lotus Sutra, True Word, and other teachings, and devote themselves entirely to the Nimbutsu, then 10 persons out of 10 and 100 persons out of 100 will be reborn in the Pure Land. These pronouncements of Honen precipitated debates and disputes with the priests of Mount Hei, Toji, Onjoji, and the seven major temples of Nara. But Eshin's words in the preface to his Essentials of Rebirth in the Pure Land appeared to be so compelling that in the end, Kenshin, chief priest of Mount Hei, surrendered to the Nimbutsu doctrine and became a disciple of Honen. In addition to that, even people who were not disciples of Honen began to recite the Nimbutsu to Amida Buddha far more often than they paid reverence to any other Buddha, their mouths continually murmuring it, their minds constantly occupied with it, until it seemed that everyone throughout the country of Japan had become a follower of Honen. In the past 50 years, every person within the 4 quarters of the nation has become a follower of Honen. And if everyone has become a follower of Honen, then every person in the country of Japan is a slanderer of the law. Now, if 1,000 sons or daughters should band together to murder one parent, then all 1,000 of them would be guilty of committing the 5 cardinal sins. And if one of them, as a result, should fall into the Avicii hell, then how could the others escape the same fate? In the end, it would seem as though Honen, angry at having been condemned to exile, turned to an evil spirit and took possession of the sovereign and the priests of Mount Hei and Onjoji, who had earlier persecuted him as disciples, causing these persons to plot rebellion or to commit other evil acts. As a result, they were almost all destroyed by the Kamakura authorities in eastern Japan. The few priests of Mount Hei and Toji who managed to survive are treated with contempt by laymen and women. They are like performing monkeys that are laughed at by the crowd, or subjugated barbarians who are despised even by children. The men of the Zen school. So that was the first one, was talking about the Nimbutsu. The second one's now talking about Zen. The men of the Zen school, middle of page 563, first column. The men of the Zen school, taking advantage of this situation, pronounce themselves observers of the precepts, deceiving the eyes of the people and putting on such lofty airs that no matter what false doctrines they presumed in their madness to put forward, these doctrines were not recognized as erroneous. This school, called Zen, claims to present a separate transmission outside the sutras, which was not revealed by Shakyamuni Buddha in the numerous sutras preached during his lifetime, but was whispered in secret to the venerable Mahakashyapa. Thus, the proponents of this school maintain that if one studies the various sutras without understanding the teachings of the Zen school, one will be like a dog trying to bite at a clap of thunder, or a monkey grasping at the moon's reflection in the water. Zen is a false doctrine that appeals to the kind of people in Japan who have been abandoned by their fathers and mothers because of their lack of filial devotion, or diminished from service by their lords because of their outrageous conduct, to young priests who are too lazy to apply themselves to their studies, and to the disreputable nature of courtesans. Even though its followers have all embraced the precepts, they are no more than swarming locusts feeding upon the people of the nation. That is why heaven glares down in anger and the gods of the earth shudder. And now 3, True Word. The True Word school is a far greater source of trouble than the other 2 schools I have discussed above, a major form of error, and I would therefore like to discuss it in outline here. In the reign of the Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang Dynasty, the Tripitaka master Shanwei, Qin Kangqi, and Pukun brought the Mahavajrana diamond crown and Sudhikara Sutras from India and introduced them to China. The teachings of these three sutras are very clearly set forth. If we look for the basic principle, we find that it consists in unifying the two vehicles of voice hearers and cause awakened ones in the one vehicle of bodhisattvas and repudiating the two vehicles to reveal the one vehicle. As far as practices go, the school employs mudras and mantras. Such a doctrine cannot compare even with the one vehicle of Buddhahood that is taught in contrast to the three vehicles of voice hearers and cause awakened ones and bodhisattvas in the Flower Garland and Wisdom Sutras, nor is it even as profound as the specific teaching or the perfect teaching that preceded the Lotus Sutras clarified by the teacher by the Tentai school. In its basic meaning, at least, it corresponds merely to the two lower types of teaching, the Tripitaka teaching and the connecting teaching. The Tripitaka master Shanwu Wei no doubt realized that if he were to expound the teaching set forth in these sutras brought from India, he would be ridiculed by the men of the Flower Garland and Dharma characteristic schools and laughed at by those of the Tendai school. And yet, since he had gone to all the trouble of bringing these works from India, probably he did not feel inclined simply to remain silent on the matter. At this time, there was a priest of the Tentai school called the meditation master Yi Swing, a perverse man. Shanwu Wei went to him and questioned him on the Buddhist doctrines taught in China. Acharya Yi Swing, deceived as to his motives, not only revealed to Shanwu Wei the main principles of the three treatises, Dharma characteristics, and Flower Garland doctrines, but even explained the teachings of the Tentai school to him. Shanwu Wei realized that the Tentai teachings were even finer than he had supposed when he had heard of them in India, and that the doctrines of these sutras he had brought could never compete with them. But he set out about to deceive I Swing, H-S-I-N-G, saying, my good priest, you are one of the cleverest men of China, and the Tentai school has a truly profound and wonderful teaching. But the True Word School, whose teachings I have brought to China, excels it. In fact, in the fact that it employs the mudras and mantras. He Swing appeared to find this reasonable. And the Tripitaka master Shanwu Wei then said to him, just as the great teacher Tentai wrote commentaries on the Lotus Sutra, so I would like to compose a commentary on the Mahavrachana Sutra in order to propagate the true word teachings. Could you write it down for me? I Swing replied, that would be easy enough. But in what way should I write? I Swing asked, saying, the Tentai school is unassailable, and though each of the other schools of Buddhism has competed in trying to refute its doctrines, none has gained the slightest success because of a single point. That point is the fact that in the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra, an introductory teaching to the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha declares that in his various sutras, in the various sutras he has preached during the previous 40 and more years, he has not yet revealed the truth, thus invalidating the doctrines based on those various sutras. And in the Teacher of the Law, in the Teacher of the Law and Supernatural Powers chapter of the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha states that no sutras that will be preached in the latter time can ever equal the Lotus Sutra. In the passage of the Teacher of the Law chapter concerning the comparison of the Lotus Sutra and others preached at the same time, he also makes clear the superiority of the Lotus Sutra. To which of these three categories, the sutras preached before the Lotus Sutra, those preached contemporaneously with it, or those preached later, should the Mahavrachana Sutra be assigned? He's asking to Shanwu Wei. At that point, the Tripitaka master Shanwu Wei hit upon an exceedingly cunning idea. This is in quotation, the Mahavrachana Sutra, he explained to I Swing, begins with a chapter called the Stage of the Mind. Just as in the case of the Immeasurable Meaning Sutra, which refutes all the sutras that had been preached in the previous 40 and more years, this Stage of the Mind chapter invalidates all the other sutras. The remaining chapters of the Mahavrachana Sutra, from the entering the Mandala chapter through the end, became known in China as two versions, the Lotus Sutra and the Mahavrachana Sutra, though in India they constituted a single sutra. Shakyamuni Buddha, addressing Shakyamuni Buddha, addressing Shariputra and Maitreya, preached the Mahavajrana Sutra, which he called the Lotus Sutra, but he omitted the explanations of the mudras and mantras and expounded only the doctrines. This is the work that the Tripitaka master Kumarajiva introduced to China and the great teacher Tentai employed. At the same time, however, the thus come one, Mahavajrana, addressing Vajrasattva, preached the Lotus Sutra, which he called the Mahavajrana Sutra. This is the work now called the Mahavajrana Sutra, a work that I often saw when I was in India. Therefore, I want to explain that the Mahavajrana Sutra and the Lotus Sutra are to be savored as works that are essentially the same in flavor, just like water and milk. If you do so, then the Mahavajrana Sutra can stand superior to all the other sutras preached in the past, present, and future in the same way that the Lotus Sutra does. As to the mudras and mantras, if they are used to adorn the doctrines of the mind, which is expressed in the term a single moment of life comprising 3,000 realms, this will constitute a secret teaching in which the three mysteries are provided. And with the doctrine containing the 3,000 mysteries, the true word will prove superior to the Tentai school, which speaks only of the mystery of the mind. True Word School is like a general of the first rank who dons armor, slings his bow and arrows over his shoulder, and fastens a sword at his waist. But the Tendai School, with nothing but mystery of the mind, is like a general of the first rank who is stark naked. Arachiva, Isang, wrote all his doctrine down just as Shang Wei dictated it. Okay? This guy. Throughout the 360 states of China, there was no one who knew about this ruse that was between this guy that was a great teacher from the Lotus School, but that was approached by Shan Wei to try and make the Mahavajrana School viable with its teaching. He's the one that stole the ghee of everybody's a Buddha. Hang on. Acharya Isang wrote down all this just as Shan Wei dictated it. Throughout the 360 states of China, there was no one who knew about this ruse. At first, there were some disputes over the relative merits of the Tentai and True Word teaching, but Shan Wei was the kind of person who was able to command a great deal of respect, whereas the men of the Tentai school were regarded lightly. Moreover, at this time, there were no men of wisdom such as the great teacher Tentai had been. Thus, day by day, the Tentai school lost more ground to the True Word school, and finally, all debates ceased. This is all before Dengyo. As more and more years have gone by, these fraudulent beginnings of the True Word school have become completely obscured and forgotten. When the great teacher Dengyo of Japan went to China and returned with the teachings of the Tentai school, he also brought back the True Word teachings. The Tentai doctrine he recommended to the Emperor of Japan, but the True Word teachings he turned over to the eminent priests of the 6 schools to study. Dengyo had already established the superiority of the Tentai teachings over those of the 6 schools before he went to China. After he came back from China, he attempted to establish an ordination platform for conferring the precepts of perfect and immediate enlightenment, but this involved him in a great deal of controversy. He had many enemies and probably felt that establishing the ordination platform would be difficult enough to accomplish, even if he devoted all of his efforts to it. Or perhaps he felt that the refutation of the True Word teachings should be left until the latter day of the law. In any event, he did not discuss the True Word teachings in the presence of the emperor or make any clear pronouncements on the matter to his disciples. It's all left up to Nichiren to qualify. However, he did leave a 1-volume secret work entitled A Clarification of the Schools, based on Tentai's doctrine. That's the title of the work, in which he describes how various priests of the 7 schools were won over to Tentai's teachings. In the preface to that work, he mentions the fraudulence of the True Word teachings. The great teacher Kobo went to Tianji, China, during the Enraku era, when the great teacher Dengyo went. There he studied the teachings of the True Word school under Hui Kuo of the temple called Xing Lung Su. After returning to Japan, he pronounced judgment on the relative merits of the doctrines preached by Shakyamuni in the course of his lifetime, declaring that the true word teachings ranked first, the flower garland second, and those of the Lotus Sutra third. Pardon me. The great teacher Kobo enjoys a quite unusual amount of respect among the people of our time. However, although I hesitate to touch on such matters in question of the Buddhist teaching, he committed a rather unusual number of errors. If we stop to consider the matter in general, it would appear that when he went to China, he merely learned the ritual mudras and mantras that were used by the True Word School and introduced these to Japan. But he does not seem to have delved into the doctrines of the school to any great extent. After he returned to Japan and observed the situation at the time, he saw that the Tendai school was flourishing at an unusual degree, and he concluded that it would be difficult to propagate the true word doctrines that he himself adhered to. Therefore, he adopted the viewpoint of the Flower Garland School, whose doctrines he had studied earlier in Japan, declaring that the Flower Garland Sutra was superior to the Lotus Sutra. But he realized that if he simply asserted the superiority of the Flower Garland Sutra over the Lotus Sutra in the same manner as the Flower Garland Sutra school, people would not be likely to pay much heed to his works. He consequently gave a new twist to the Flower Garland doctrine, declaring that his argument represented the true intent of the Mahavajrana Sutra, Mind Aspiring for Enlightenment, by Bodhisattva Nagarjuna and Shan Wei, thus bolstering his position with absurd falsehoods. And yet, the followers of the Tendai school failed to speak out strongly against him. And so that slander spread. Question. In his treatise on the 10 stages of the mind, the precious key to the secret treasury, and a comparison of exoteric and esoteric Buddhism, the great teacher Kobo makes such statements as each vehicle, pardon me, each vehicle that is put forward is claimed to be the vehicle of Buddhahood, but when examined from a later stage, they are all seen to be merely childish theory. Shakyamuni Buddha is in the region of darkness, not in the position of enlightenment. The various exoteric Mahayana sutras, such as the Lotus Sutra, are comparable to the fourth flavor, that of butter, and that the Buddhist teachers of China vied with one another to steal the ghee, or true word, and claim that it is the possession of their own school. What are we to make of such statements put forth in such commentaries? That's the question. In other words, there's commentaries that are in opposition of what you're saying, Nichiren. True Word people are saying the opposite of what you're saying about the Tentai people. Answer. I have been, on page 566, second column, answer, middle of the column. I have been greatly astonished at the statements of these commentaries and have accordingly searched through the various sutras, including the 3 attributed to the thus come one Mahavajrana. But I do not find a single word or phrase in the sutras to indicate that, in comparison to the Flower Garland and Mahavajrana sutras, the Lotus Sutra is mere childish theory. That with regard to the 6 Paramita sutras, Tentai acted as a thief, or that the Protection Sutra describes Shakyamuni Buddha as being in the region of darkness. These are all utterly ridiculous assertions. And yet, for the past 300 or 400 years, a sufficiently large number of intelligent persons in Japan accepted them, so that they now come to be looked upon as perfectly reasonable and well-founded. I would like for a moment, therefore, to discuss some of the more patently false opinions put forth by Kobo and point out other absurdities in his thinking. This is the continuation of an answer from Nichiren. It was during the period of the Chen and Sui dynasties that the great teacher Tiantai likened the Lotus Sutra to ghee, the finest flavor. It was some 200 years later, in the middle years of the Tang dynasty, that the Tripitaka master Prajna translated the 6 Paramita Sutra and introduced it to China. Only if the 6 Paramita Sutra, which compares the Dharani teachings to ghee, had existed in China during the Qin and Sui dynasties, would it have made any sense to claim that the great teacher Tentai stole the gi of the true word teachings? A similar example exists in the case of the priest Tokuitsu of Japan. He bitterly criticized the great teacher Tentai for rejecting the doctrine of the teachings of the three periods that is set forth in the Profound Secret Sutra, declaring that Tentai had used his 3-inch tongue to destroy the body's 5-foot Buddha. Pardon me, the Buddha's 5-foot body. The great teacher Dingo, in turn, attacked Tokuitsu, pointing out that the Profound Secret Sutra was first introduced by China by Xuanzang in the early decades of the Tang Dynasty. In other words, it was brought to the country a number of years after Tentai Chi-Chi, who lived in the Qin and Sui, had already passed away. How then could he have rejected a doctrine that was not introduced to China until the period after his passing? Facing with such an argument, not only was Tokuitsu reduced to silence, but his tongue broke into 8 pieces and he died. Continuing, page 567. But this is nothing compared to the evil accusations. Only got one?
We're out of battery. I'll upload this
Okay.
one.
But this is nothing compared to the evil accusations made by Kobo. In his writings, he labels his thieves at Fa Sang of the Flower Garland School, Chia Sing of the Three Treatises School, Suang Sang of the Dharma Characteristics School, and Tiantai, as well as other various Buddhist leaders of northern and southern China. And in fact, all the Tripitaka masters and the Buddhist teachers who have lived since the time when Buddhism was first introduced to China in the latter Han. In addition, it should be noted that likening the Lotus Sutra to gi was by no means a comparison invented by Tentai on his own initiative. The Buddha himself in the Nirvana Sutra said that the Lotus Sutra is like gi, and later Bodhisattva Vasubandhu wrote that the Lotus Sutra and the Nirvana Sutra are comparable to gi. And Bodhisattva Nagarjuna terms the Lotus Sutra a wonderful medicine. So if one who compares the Lotus Sutra to gi is a thief, then are not Shakyamuni many treasures and the Buddhas of the 10 directions, Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu, thieves? Though Kobo's disciples and the true word priests of Toji Temple in Japan may be so poor-sighted that they cannot distinguish black from white with their own eyes, they should trust the sight of others and recognize the misfortunes invited by their own faults. Moreover, when are the precise passages of the Mahavira? Where are the precise passages? Moreover, where are the precise passages in the Mahavira and Diamond Crown Sutra that refer to the Lotus Sutra as childish theory that you've said it is? Let them produce them. Even if these sutras should perhaps refer to the Lotus Sutra in those terms, it may quite possibly be an error in translation. Such matters should be examined with great care and attention before they are put forward. We are told that Confucius thought 9 times before saying one word. That time, the Duke of Chao would bind up his hair 3 times in course of washing it and spit out his food 3 times in the course of a meal in order to not keep callers waiting. Thus, we see that among the men depicted in the non-Buddhist writings who studied ephemeral worldly affairs, those who were wise proceeded with great caution. How then can men like Kobo be so careless and shallow in judgment in matters pertaining to the law? Such erroneous views of Kobo's were handed down until they reached Shokakubo, the founder of the temple called Dembo-in, who stated in his rules of rights for revering the Buddha's relics, the figure worthy of The figure worthy of true respect is the Buddha of the non-dual Mahayana. The 3-bodied donkey or ox Buddha is not even fit to draw his carriage. The truly profound doctrines are the teachings of the twofold mandala. The teachings of the 4 doctrines of the exoteric vehicles are not worthy even to tend the sandals of those who teach the mandala. The teachers of the 4 doctrines of the exoteric vehicles means the priests who teach the Dharma characteristics, 3 treatises, flower garland, and lotus doctrines. And the three-bodied donkey or ox Buddha means the four Buddhas, the lords of the teachings of the lotus, flower garland, wisdom, and profound secret sutras. It is saying that these Buddhas and priests are not even worthy to act as ox drivers or sandal tenders for such true word teachers as Kobo or Shokakubo. There was a man in India known as the great arrogant Brahmin, who was born with innate wisdom and was widely read. Both the exoteric and the esoteric teachings of Buddhism were stored up in his breast, and he had both the Buddhist and non-Buddhist writings in the palm of his hand. Even the king and his ministers bowed their heads before him, and the common people looked up to him as a teacher and guide. But in the excess of his arrogance, he went so far as to make himself a dais supported by four legs representing the deities Maheshvara, Vishnu, Narayana, along with the world-honored one of great enlightenment, four sages among whom the world holds in great honor, seating himself on it when he expounded his doctrines. He was like the true word priests of our time when they spread their mandala with its representations of Shakyamuni and the other various Buddhas and performed their ceremony of anointment, or like the Zen priests when they declare that the teachings of their school represent a great law that steps upon the head of the Buddha. At this time, there was a humble monk called the scholar Bhadraruchi monk called, At this time, there was a humble monk called the scholar Bhadraruchi, who declared that the Brahmins should be corrected. But neither the ruler and high ministers nor the common people would listen to such a suggestion. In the end, the Brahmin charged his disciples and lay supporters to go about spreading countless falsehoods and abusing and beating Bhadraruchi. But Bhadraruchi, disregarding the danger to his life, discontinued to denounce the Brahmin until the ruler, coming to hate Bhadraruchi, arranged for him to debate with the Brahmin in hopes of silencing him. Contrary to his expectations, however, the Brahmin was the one defeated in the debate. The king looked up to heaven, then threw himself upon the ground, lamenting, and said, "I have been privileged to hear your words on this matter firsthand, and to free myself from my erroneous views. But my father, the former king, was completely deceived by this man, and by now has probably fallen into the Avicii hell." So saying, he clung to the knees of the scholar Bhadraruchi and wept in sorrow. At Bhadraruchi's suggestion, the Brahmin was placed on the back of a donkey so that he might be led in disgrace throughout India and shown to all. But the evil in his heart only grew stronger than ever, and in his living form he fell into the hell of incessant suffering. Was he any different from the followers of the true word in Zen schools in the world today? The Chinese meditation master Shan Chie stated that the Lotus Sutra, which represents the teachings of the Buddha Shakyamuni, is a doctrine suited for the first and second stages of Buddhism, which corresponds to the former and middle days of the law. For the latter day of the law, however, he asserted that one should adopt the universal teaching that he himself had set forth. He declared that one should try to practice the Lotus Sutra in these present times. He declared that if one should try to practice the Lotus Sutra in these present times, one would surely fall into the great Avicii hell of the 10 directions because its teachings do not accord with the nature and capabilities of the people of the latter age. He carried out protestations and penances to the proper hours 6 times each day and observed the 4 daily meditations periods, conducting himself like a living Buddha. Many people paid him honor, and his disciples numbered more than 10,000. But one young woman dared to recite the Lotus Sutra and to censure him for his doctrines. As a result, he lost his voice on the spot and was reborn as a huge snake that devoured a number of disciples and lay supporters, as well as girls and young women. And now, Shantao and Honan, with their pernicious doctrine that not even one person in 1,000 can be saved by the Lotus Sutra, are just like this man, San Chei. Many years have passed now since these great sources of trouble, the Nimbutsu, Zen, and True Word teachings came into existence, and one should not underestimate their influence. But I feel that if I speak out against them in this way, there will perhaps be those who will heed my words. And yet, there is something that is more evil than these three teachings. So, evil that is 100,000, 10,000, million times more difficult to believe. And yet, there is something, again, bottom of first column, page 569. And yet, there is something that is more evil than these three teachings. So evil that is 100,000, 10,000, million times more difficult to believe. Though the great teacher Jikaku was the third disciple of the great teacher Dingyo, everyone from the ruler on down to the common people believed him to be a more outstanding person than the great teacher Dingyo himself. He made an exhaustive study of the teachings of the True Word School and of the Lotus Sutra, and he stated in his writings that the True Word teachings are superior to those of the Lotus Sutra. That's Jikaku. That's where it's split off. As a result, the community of priests on Mount Hei, which numbered 3,000, as well as the Buddhist scholars in every province throughout Japan, all came to accept his opinion on this matter. The followers of Kobo had thought that, although he was their teacher, he had perhaps gone too far when he declared the Lotus Sutra inferior to the Flower Garland Sutra. But when they saw that the great teacher Jikaku put forth a similar opinion in his exegetical writings, they took it as an accepted fact that the True Word teachings were indeed superior to the Lotus Sutra. Mount Hei ought to have been the staunchest opponent to this opinion established in Japan that the True Word teachings are superior to the Lotus Sutra, because that's what Dingyo had taught everybody based on what Tentai had taught, right? Yet Jikaku silenced the mouths of the 3,000 priests of Mount Hei and prevented them from speaking out. Jikaku said, no, we're doing the True Word. Get it? And as a result, the True Word school was able to have its way. In effect, the great teacher Jikaku was the foremost ally of Toji, the leading temple of the True Word school. Though the Pure Land and Zen schools may have flourished in other countries, they would never have been able to spread throughout Japan in countless kalpas if in Rakuji Temple on Mount Hei had not given its assent. You understand? Okay, this is again going away from what Dingyo preached as far as the Lotus Sutra superior, and now bringing in the Zen and the True Word and the whatever, right? He says, but Reverend Anand, known as the first worthy of Mount Hei, wrote a work called Different Views on the Teaching and the Time, in which he ranked the 9 schools of Buddhism in the order of their superiority, placing the True Word school in the first place, the Zen school in the second place, the Tendai school in the third, and the Flower Garland school in the fourth, and so forth. Because of this egregious error in interpretation, the Zen school has been able to spread its teaching throughout Japan, bringing the country to the brink of ruin. And Honen was able to propagate the teachings of the Nimbutsu school, similarly causing the nation to be imperiled as a result of the opinions first put forth by Eshin in the preface to the Essentials of the Rebirth in the Pure Land. The Buddha tells us that only the worms born from the body of the lion itself feed on the lion. How true are those words? The great teacher Dingyo spent a period of 15 years in Japan studying the Tentai and True Word doctrines on his own. He was endowed by the nature with a wonderful degree of understanding, and without the aid of a teacher, realized the truth. But in order to dispel the doubts of the world, he journeyed to China, where he received instruction in the teachings of the Tentai and True Word schools. The scholars in China held various opinions, but Dingyo believed in his heart that the Lotus Sutra was superior to the True Word teachings. Therefore, he did not use the word school, when referring to the True Word School, but simply spoke of the concentration and insight and True Word practices of the Tendai School. He decreed that 2 priests should be ordained each year and should spend a period of 12 years in study on Mount Hei. In addition, he received an impartial edict designating the Lotus, Golden Light, and Benevolent King Sutras as the 3 scriptures for the protection of the nation, and decreeing that they be read and recited in Shinkan-in. It went on to liken these 3 sutras to the 3 treasures of the imperial household, the eternal and foremost treatises of the Japanese nation, which are the sacred jewel, the sacred sword, and the sacred mirror. After Dingyo's passing, the first chief priest of the Tendai school on Mount Hei, the Reverend Gishin, and the second chief priest, the great teacher Incho, carried on Dingyo's intentions without any deviation. The third chief priest, the great teacher Jikaku, also went to Dang China, where he spent 10 years studying the relative merits of the exoteric and esoteric teachings under 8 distinguished priests. He also studied under priests of the Tendai school such as Kuang Sui and Wei Chuan, but in his heart he believed that the True Word School was superior to the Tendai school. He felt that his teacher, the great teacher Dingyo, had not gone into the matter in sufficient detail, that he had not remained for an extended period in China, and hence had acquired only a rough understanding of the True Word doctrines. After Jikaku had returned to Japan, he founded a great lecture hall called Shoji-in, west of Shinkan-in, in the Toto era on Mount Hei, in which he established the thus come one Mahevro-chan of the Diamond Realm as an object of devotion. In front of his image, he composed, on the basis of Shangwu Wei's commentary on the Mahevra-chana Sutra, a 7-volume commentary on the Diamond Crown Sutra, and a 7-volume commentary on the Sudhikara Sutra, making a total of 14 volumes. The essence of these commentaries is as follows. There are 2 types of teachings. One is called the exoteric, which corresponds to the doctrine of the 3 vehicles. In this, worldly truth and the superior truth of Buddhism are not completely fused. Let me say it again. The essence of these commentaries is as follows. There are 2 types of teachings. One is called the exoteric, which corresponds to the doctrine of the 3 vehicles. In this, worldly truth and the superior truth of Buddhism are not completely fused. What are the 3 vehicles? The other is called the esoteric, which corresponds to the doctrine of the 1 vehicle. So the 3 vehicles are voice hearers, cause awakened ones, and bodhisattva. And then the 1 vehicle is Buddhahood. All right. So the other is called the esoteric, which corresponds, top of page 571, to the doctrine of the 1 vehicle. The 1 vehicle is the vehicle Buddhahood. In this, worldly truth and the superior truth of Buddhism are fused together into a single entity. In turn, there are 2 types of esoteric teachings. One is called the esoteric teaching of theory. These are the doctrines found in works such as the Flower Garland Wisdom, Vilamakirti, Lotus, and Nirvana Sutras, but these, though they teach the non-dualism of worldly truth and the superior truth, say nothing about the mantras and mudras. The second is called the esoteric teachings of both theory and practice. These are the doctrines found in the Mahevra-chana Diamond Crown and Sudhikara Sutras. These teach the non-dualism of worldly truth and the superior truth, and also explain mantras and mudras. So, this essentially means that in regard to the relative superiority of the Lotus Sutra, the 3 True Word Sutras just mentioned, they agree in principle, both teaching the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, but mudras and mantras are not mentioned in the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra thus represents the esoteric teachings of theory, while the 3 True Word Sutras represent the esoteric teachings of both theory and practice. They are hence as far apart as heaven and school, or as clouds and mud, say the commentaries. Moreover, Jikaku insists that this is no private interpretation of his own, but represents the essential view put forward by the Tripitaka master Shanmu Wei in his commentary on the Mahavajrana Sutra. But perhaps he felt that the relative worth of the Tendai and True Word schools was still a matter of doubt, or perhaps he hoped to dispel the misgivings of others. In any event, the biography of the great teacher Jikaku states as follows: after the great teacher had completed writing his commentaries on the two sutras and thus accomplished his aim, he wondered to himself whether or not his commentaries conformed to the will of the Buddha, for he believed that if they did not conform to the Buddha's will, they will never be widely circulated in the world. He therefore placed the commentaries before the image of the Buddha and determined to spend 7 days and 7 nights earnestly praying and endeavoring to make clear the validity of his purpose. On the 5th day, early in the morning, at the time of the 5th watch, he dreamed that it was high noon and the sun was shining in the sky. Looking up, he took a bow and shot an arrow at it. The arrow struck the sun, which immediately began to roll over and over. After he awoke from his dream, he realized that his views were profoundly in accord with the will of the Buddha, and he determined to transmit his commentaries to future ages. While the great teacher Jikaku was in Japan, he made a thorough study of the teachings of both Dengyo and Kobo, and he spent a period of 10 years in China studying under the 8 distinguished priests, including the Tripitaka master Pao Ye of southern India, learning all the loftiest and most secret doctrines. On this basis, he completed his commentaries on the two sutras. In addition, he prayed to the image of the Buddha, and he awoke from dreaming that he had seen the arrow of wisdom strike the sun of the middle way. So great was his joy that he requested Emperor Nimyo to issue an edict acknowledging Hei as a center of the true word practice. Though he was the chief priest of the Tendai school, he virtually became a true word prelate, declaring that 3 true word sutras were the works that would ensure peace and protection of the nation. It has now been more than 400 years since he spread these doctrines. The eminent leaders who have accepted them as numerous as rice and hemp seedlings, and the fervent believers who have embraced them are as plentiful as bamboo plants and rushes. As a result, all the temples established throughout the Japan. As a result, this is the end of that answer. As a result of all the temples established throughout Japan by Emperor Kanmu and the great teacher Dengyo, there is not one that has become a propagator of the true word doctrine. Both courtiers and warriors alike invite the true word priests to attend to their religious needs. Look up to them as teachers, confirm offices upon them, and place them in charge of temples. And in the eye-opening ceremony carried out by the consecration of wooden and painted Buddhist images, the priests of all the 8 schools of Buddhism now use the mudras and mantras of the thus come one, Mahavajrana, and the world-honored one, Buddha Eye.